Hello friends, welcome. Today's talk is on work of ADEPTS. Next week we invite as many as possible to come and be with us as we celebrate the life and amazing contributions to humanity of William Quan Judge. This lodge for the Washington, D.C. area passes on the path to truth and the ancient message of the wisdom of the ages brought to us by H.P. Blavatsky and William Q. Judge. After Robert Crosby restored the teachings to the way HPB and WQJ originally transmitted them. This message in action has always been before us within the laws of nature. Teachings as presented by religions of the world have a way of losing their purity through human interpretations, a problem that also started to hold true for Theosophy no sooner than HPB left the scene. The 19th century Theosophical movement that HPB named Theosophy and transmitted to the world was the most comprehensive and tested message of philosophy, science, and religion ever brought to the world. It provides us with the dots and more, but it is up to us to connect them through our self-induced and self-devised methods as we journey through life. However, only the few have truly taken this message to heart, although bits and pieces continue to creep into established religion and science. It was noted that centuries may go by before we have progressed enough for any messenger to present a more comprehensive message. Robert Crosby's restoration included making the original secret doctrine and related original writings available, thus allowing all of us to approach these teachings directly. Our mission is to make available to all who find us this message as we found it. HPB said nothing she presented in the secret doctrine was original except for the nosegay of ribbon used to tie together this ancient message of the masters of wisdom. She showed the path to perfection in this message, but we must assimilate this message into our daily lives. In this regard, the declaration of the United Lodge of Theosophists, which this lodge and many lodges throughout the world follow, is as follows. The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of Theosophy, without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the Theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and the exemplification and practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization. And it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. Today's reading is from the Voice of the Silence. Yea, on the Arya path, thou art no more Shodapati, thou art a Bodhisattva. The stream is crossed. 'Tis true thou hast the right to Dharmakaya Vestra, but Sambhogakaya is greater than a Navarni, and greater still is a Namanakaya, the Buddha of compassion. Now bend thy head and listen well, O Bodhisattva. Compassion speaks and saith, can there be bliss when all that lives must suffer? Shalt thou be saved and hear the whole world cry? Now thou hast heard that which was said. Thou shalt attain the seventh step and cross the gate of final knowledge, but only to wed woe, if thou wouldst be Tathagata. Follow upon thy predecessor steps, remain unselfish to the endless end. Thou art enlightened, choose thy way. Behold the mellow light that floods the eastern sky. In signs of praise both heaven and earth unite, and from the fourfold manifested powers a chant of love ariseth, both from the flaming fire and flowing water, and from the sweet-smelling earth and rushing wind. Hark, from the deep, unfathomable vortex of that golden light in which the victor bathes, all nature's wordless voice in thousand tones arise to proclaim, joy unto ye, O men of Mayalba, a pilgrim hath returned back from the other shore. A new Arhan is born. And now for today's talk.
Good morning and welcome, friends. Please silence your phones. This is a topic that needs to be addressed, but it is rather difficult to express who the adepts are and what their work is in the world, but we will give it a try. In the 19th century, when HPB came into the world to present this philosophy, she made a bold statement that there was a fraternity of souls, perfected souls, under whose help and direction she was working, and it was from this lodge of masters that the knowledge had been presented to the world through the books that she eventually wrote. Now, who are they, we should ask? Who are the masters? Who are the adepts? Well, we will read a section of the Ocean of Theosophy. In the first chapter, Mr. Judge explains a very important aspect of this brotherhood. He says, the most intelligent beings in the universe, man, has never then been without a friend, but has a line of elder brothers who continually watch over the progress of the less progressed, preserve the knowledge gained through eons of trial and experience, and continually seek for opportunities of drawing the developing intelligence of the race on this or other globes to consider the great truths concerning the destiny of the soul. These elder brothers also keep the knowledge they have gained of the laws of nature in all departments, and are ready when cyclic law permits to use it for the benefit of mankind. So here we have the statement that humanity has never been without these great souls. These great souls. And they obviously constitute a brotherhood, and not only that, we also refer to them as a lodge, the Master's Lodge. So they're perfected beings, they're great souls, but how did they achieve that? Since the beginning of time, they have been around, because Mr. Judge says that we have never been without friends. So obviously, from beginning of the Manvantara, they're there to assist and help the progression, the evolutionary process of nature and man. So then, how did they come to be? Where did they gain this knowledge? Well, obviously, the evolutionary process goes from one world to another, in other words, a chain of globes to another chain of globes, but on each chain, we progress to a degree, and some souls, regardless of how many, achieve this perfection through their own effort. Perfection through their own effort. And what does that mean, perfection? Well, we have an intellectual nature, a spiritual nature, a psychic nature. So obviously, all of these are perfected, and these masters of wisdom, or the great souls, the adepts, can live on each and every plane of consciousness without losing that continuity. And this is the goal. This is the perfectibility we talked about in the teachings, and these great beings achieve this. So from their numbers then come into the world these great souls, saviors of mankind, who at certain periods of time, when the cyclic law enables them to interject these philosophies of truth into our lives, they do so. So then, when we look at the word religions, every religion gives its own prophet or exalted being, whoever brought it into the world, a special place, and then they refuse to accept all of the other teachers that come at different ages, and so they give it a name. They give a name to the one who has brought the philosophy of life, philosophy of truth into the world in different ages, a different title, never realizing that an adept is not made. Adepts are not made. They evolve to that degree of perfectibility. And obviously there are different degrees of perfectibility, but at the highest level, we just read from the voice of the silence what happens when one of them becomes a savior of mankind, joining the ranks of all of the other adepts in the world. And when we look at their lives, we realize that all of them, regardless of what they have brought into the world, their lives are very similar to one another. And in the Secret Doctrine, we are told that we have to look at these events from three different aspects. One is historical, the second is mythical, and the other one is astronomical. So the astronomical and the historical kind of is weaved together with the mythical aspect of the human soul, the great soul that has sacrificed itself for humanity and have decided to come back in a physical body to instruct humanity again. So when we look at their lives, what exactly is it that we see? We see that they're divinely begotten saviors, every one of them, whether at birth or afterwards, is searched for and threatened with death by an opposing power, whether it is called Kansa, Herod, Maya, or Mara. They are all tempted, persecuted, and finally said to have been murdered at the end of the rite of initiation, that is, in their physical personalities. And so that birth that they go through is a spiritual birth, resurrection or rejuvenation. Then after this allegorical violent death, they all descend to the netherworld or Naraka, hell or Hades, to save the souls of the damned. On their triumphant return, they have become transformed into gods. Thus they are given the epithet of Soter, or Savior. So then, this clearly shows that the evolutionary process is geared to the perfectibility of the human soul. That these beings, these great souls, were men and women, just like we are at some time in their procession of getting to that point where they have become perfected. So then, if we look at the historical facts, we see that regardless of how few some souls fit themselves to follow in the footsteps of these great souls and undertake that willing progression that will lead them to the same event and then finally to the same result. So then, if this is a progression, when we look at the historical events, we see that some few have followed it. And it says here that when the missionaries went to China, they were really appalled at finding that for he was born of a virgin whose story is the counterpart of the narrative of Mary. In India, Krishna was born of the virgin Devaki, who bore in her womb the lotus-eyed deity. Buddha shot through the void as a six-rayed star and entered Maya's womb upon the right. And if we go to Siam, Kodam was virgin born. The Egyptian Horus, the Babylonian Adonis, and Bacchus or Dionysus were born of virgins. And so was the Mexican Quetzalcoatl. And in Bacap, Yucatan. Bacap in Yucatan. So then we see this same thing everywhere. So the ancient biographies of the external personalities bearing the names of these great souls are the mystic records of their public and parallel inner lives, in their character as neophytes or initiates. hence the manifest sameness, in other words, the construction of their respective biographies. So, how would we then prove this to ourselves? Well, we have the historical records, we have their life events, we have their philosophy, regardless of how scantily scattered around the world, and the mythical fables and correlative aspects of their philosophy exist to this day. So we can study, check, and verify these facts for ourselves. In fact, the secret doctrine has done this for us where our present age is concerned, and by actually studying that part of the book, we can also come to the same conclusion through our own effort of verifying and finding the truth for ourselves. So then, these myths are about the great sacrifice of the master souls, whether they're initiates, adepts, or otherwise. It is an incarnation of the Lord of compassion for the sake of orphan humanity. And the fact that that lodge impressed on the minds of many peoples by spreading in their midst allegorical stories of heroes who are supposed to have gone through experiences similar to that master soul. And every human ego can emulate that in themselves. And so then such experiences are often purposely woven into the lives of local rulers, saints, and sages. So then we just said that all their life stories are very similar because it's constructed on the same basis. And the language that they bring this philosophy, this truth in, is in symbols. That symbological language is universal. And through religions, philosophies, sciences, all branches of knowledge spring up from this root, the wisdom of the ages, the wisdom religion as said. For the ancient universal language is one. Today, that wisdom religion was brought out as Theosophy, and it is the drama of the unfoldment of the one life, the springing forth of the many lives from the one life, and the orderly procession of the many as the kingdoms of nature till they re-become the one. From the contents of the record of the masters, these records intermittently, when the cyclic law and time permit, is brought out into the universe of men and presented. So that this phenomenon is very holy and sacred. And we need to understand that when we also come to the Theosophical ULTs, that same process exists in it. We are here exposed to all of this wisdom that was presented in the 19th century. So then, what do masters do? Well, we are told that at the beginning of each mantra, their responsibility is to study. They study, and then they verify their findings and come to conclusions. This is not based on one adept's study and verification, but thousands of them. Until all of them agree to it, they do not accept it as the truth. So then this lodge, which is not really a place, but a brotherhood of perfected souls who are spread in different parts of the world have the responsibility to preserve all these truths for the benefit of humanity. So we can do the same thing. We can study, we can assimilate, we can give it out, we can verify it, accept it, and in that way grow towards this path. This record in their safekeeping, as said, is for humanity. At times, when we look at the historical facts all around our world, a lot of destruction has taken place. So obviously, they make sure that the original copies of all of the philosophical writings, in whatever form it was presented in that symbology, is kept up to date. Not only that, this creative force that they exert is in all directions, in the sense that they preserve it. But when you look at our world today and compare it to even what it was in the earlier centuries, we see that tremendous changes have come about. So their verification and acceptance of natural law depends also on the changes that occur in our world. So they verify and then they write it down in symbological language for the safekeeping for humanity, for the future generations to come. So in order for us to move in this direction, we have to become workers also for that same purpose, which is ultimately compassion for all those human beings who are suffering. So when a perfected being reaches that highest stage, and by donning the robe, he would then leave this earth and not be able to help humanity, the greatest sacrifice they make is not to assume that robe, but they refuse the Dharmakaya robe and they assume Nirmanakaya robe, which means that they can stay in the atmosphere of earth and help humanity as much as they can. So that creative power then becomes available to us too if we want to do the same thing. Preservative powers of nature are also there. So whatever it is that they do, they also have to preserve it, and they make an effort in that direction that all of the writings are preserved. And we just read that their work is not in one direction. All those great souls who assume the title of Soter, Savior, come back to do a particular work. They can be philosophers, they can be teachers, they can be preservers of the writings. They can also be the ones that are agents of this lodge that are distributing that original writings through music, for instance, because this student was really surprised when trying to get at the Mahabharata, found the Gita as a song which is sung, and the language is very beautiful because it's in its original. Obviously, translation is wonderful for us to learn from it, but it does not have the same implication, because that sound obviously is based on some symbology and its construction is beautiful. So they are in all departments of nature to present this truth to us, and when they come, we don't really recognize them any different than us, because they assume a body. Their body is not same as ours. It looks the same, but it is built of very refined material because they are electromagnetic beings. So then, how would we recognize one? A lot of people want to see them in physical bodies, but what sign would they have that we would know them as masters of wisdom, whether they be initiates, neophytes, adepts, because there are all different classes of them too. How would we recognize them? And the statement is made that unless our inner faculties are developed, we won't be able to recognize them. So they do their work in silence, without being obvious to humanity who has not been initiated or who as yet have not developed their inner faculties. So they have that creative, preservative, and also regenerative forces playing in their work. We do the same thing. We work with all those three creative, preservative, and regenerative forces within ourselves, regardless of what it is that we undertake to do every day. So as said, the evolutionary impulse manifests in a sevenfold manner in nature in man. 7 cosmic forces unfold 7 planets. 7 hierarchies of beings beget 7 types of humans. On men-bearing globes of our system, beings who have been men out of deep compassion and the spirit of sacrifice for their fellows incarnate to impress the imperishable center in each man's heart with the supreme and sublime fact that he too can, through purity and knowledge, reach the divine status. This happened on earth when animal man became the human being some 18 million years ago. In collectivity, but one being, such compassionate beings constitute the Lodge of Mahatmas to form the nursery for future human adepts on this our earth, and from this tree of wisdom, the ever-living human banya, sprang in due season the branches known as Kapila, Hermes, Enoch, Orpheus, etc. In its constitution then, the lodge is sevenfold. However, as stated before, it is not a place, it's a brotherhood of great souls. There is also this theosophical expression, the Great Lodge, Mahashala, the Great House, translated as the Great School. It is not a place, but a collectivity of beings whose self-conscious intelligences transcends human comprehension. In that house, our lodge, 7 types of men, pure rays of light, each but an issue of the 7 sacred planets called the 7 lords, rishis, Ameshashpentas by the Zoroastrians, archangels by the Christians. Even though they have all of the wisdom at their disposal and all of the knowledge from beginning of time is with them, HPB also makes a statement that they do not claim infallibility for themselves. So depending on how perfected they are, we just read that there are 7 planes, so obviously the highest means that we have to go through the 7 planes and be perfect on each one of those, and then synthesize the 7 into a whole. It is stated that they appear on earth but at the origin of every new human race and at the junction or close of the two ends of the small and great cycle, and are known as avatars or incarnations. Their stay among mortals is exactly the time required and no more to impress upon the plastic minds of humanity the eternal verities which they embody in their own innate ideas. This is done so as to ensure the eternal truths from being utterly lost or forgotten by the forthcoming generations. So then, as a result of this spiritual vision, some souls, however few in number, make the supreme effort to follow the noble example set by the great sacrifice. In every cycle and race, souls have striven to express in thought, word, and deed that impress made within their own hearts. The successes among such strivers become the adepts and initiates. They continue the example set, incarnate among men to instruct and inspire, and do for their younger brothers what was done for them. So then, through this philosophy, we come to the conclusion that these great souls are not made, but they are the result of the evolutionary process and self-induced, self-devised effort for themselves in order to attain that perfectibility. And once they attain it, some of them refuse to go to nirvana but remain on earth to help man's progression. So then, under law, there is no such thing as magical appearance. It is all done under law. And hence, this philosophy needs to be generally disseminated so that people can understand that their own savior, whatever religion it is that they follow, was not a specially made human soul for that purpose, but that these beings, this brotherhood existed from the beginning of time, and it is from their number that one of them, through this great sacrifice, undertakes to incarnate in a body in order to instruct humanity. Thank you. Now we will open it for comments and questions.
Wow, you've implied a lot there. Now, the two pictures I'm looking at up there, HPV and Mr. Judge, were known, were recognized to be those who represented the masters, mouthpiece. The HPV was known as the mouthpiece of the masters. Yet she looked like a human being at the time. She had a body, she had illnesses, and so did Mr. Judge. Yet it seemed like masters had to have been working through them to have been able to put out the messages that they did in this Isis Unveiled, the Secret Doctrine, and so forth. So I guess my question is, you said that they have bodies that are different, and we may not recognize those bodies. They're ethereal bodies. I guess when we get to a point of development, would we recognize them?
Well, as said, they're perfected beings. In order to be amongst us, they do have to be on the physical plane. So this is, as stated, a great sacrifice for beings who are perfected and remain in their, I think it is called permanent astral bodies, that they actually construct for themselves to stay in the invisible planes of the earth, because as we said, this is the only material and solid and visible plane to our eyes. We are 7 principle. All the others are not visible with these eyes, but we do have inner senses that we can perceive on the other levels of consciousness. And until such time that those capacities are developed in human beings, they will not be able to perceive on the higher levels of consciousness, so they wouldn't really know what was the constitution of that being. Because in many articles it is stated that they can actually drop the body at any time and rise out of it, because they have astral bodies that they have built for themselves, and they travel in those, which is a lot faster for them. But this is a humanity which ridicules everything that they cannot see. So to provide physical evidence is not their aim. They come to perform a task, and for that reason they assume that body. HPB and Mr. Judge was the agents. HPB was the agent, and Mr. Judge the support of that agent, but this student believes that they are both adepts. No human being with an ordinary nature could have done all the work that they did by themselves, because when HPB went, Mr. Judge was also left in the United States to carry on with the work by himself. HPB, as soon as published ISIS Unveiled, left and went to India. So this is an internal perception to understand who these beings are and what a sacrifice they go through in order to do what is their task to do. And in many places it is stated that they assume a role. In other words, they're putting that forth for the public, but that's not who they are. In order to see who they are, we have to, many times stated, that we have to function on the inner lines of our being. In other words, the inner eye. Which is the pineal gland. Has to be open and functional, not just open.
It's not functional at all right now.
Oh, it is functional. It has its function, and it does it automatically. It has to be there. It's there, but it is petrified, meaning that you cannot consciously use it. But it all, just like all the other parts of your body, whatever its function is, it does it, but not consciously. In other words, if you wanted to continue with Patanjali's yoga aphorism, somewhere along the line, this eye, it has to be open in order to understand what he's talking about in that book and be able to follow the directions that are given in it, because it is direction that is given in that book. But when we read it with the physical eye, it gives us a different impression than when we read it with the inner eye. So all these philosophies that are brought out have that capability. They have the physical aspect because it's written, especially for the 19th century. The other fact is that these beings never write anything when they come out. Zoroaster did not, Buddha did not, Jesus did not, none of them write, but their adherents do. And in time, the philosophy in its original form that was pure and illuminating loses its power to do it, because it loses its soul. It becomes an interpretation of the original, but it does not give that same implication, because the symbolical language is not there anymore. The soul is missing from those religions. They have the writings, but the soul is not in it anymore. But humanity has to progress slowly in this direction in order to understand what is happening, because each soul progresses with their own effort. We have already passed the midpoint, and those souls who are not awakened to this reality show a skepticism towards it. And this is a problem we have. Through 1700 years, we were continuously battered as humanity by church or other organizations that wanted to make us believe some dogma they came up with that they presented to the world as the truth. And now, after 1800 years, we're trying to go back to the original, the truth statements of these great souls that come to give the same philosophy at a different time, in a different language, to a different culture, different area of our world, but the philosophy is the same. It never changes. As said, times change, so the mode of presentation has to be applicable to that time period. So HPB obviously was a great soul. She was an initiate. She had been initiated into the mysteries. She was a chela to a master, and it is stated that Guru Parampara chain, that chain of teachers, exists from the lowest to the highest, and all of them work for the same goal. These great beings, wherever they are, they know one another. They all work together for the same outcome, which is perfectibility, moving humanity towards a higher expression of itself. So how would we recognize them? Until your inner sight is there and you perceive where their philosophy is coming from, you won't be able to. You can live with them in the same house. You wouldn't know the greatness of the soul if you did not perceive it. So that's the short answer to your question.
It just occurred to the student as you were making that talk and answers, is why there's so many interpretations and individuals and different walks of life. They're using whatever is available in their current incarnation. For example, the church. They were raised in the church, and they're trying to operate from within that environment, not upset the apple cart too much, and they start realizing, especially later in life, after seeing what they see even in this incarnation, that there's something amiss here. And when they get to that point in this incarnation, it becomes virtually impossible, it seems like, for them to separate this idea of a guy in the sky, God in the sky, with the idea of them having that potential to become an adept. It's just not in their comprehension. It's a tough thing to get across. Thank you for trying to do it.
But it says here, it is not to avoid personal suffering that the teachers practice reticence. Everyone among them would welcome personal annihilation if such a sacrifice could bring peace and harmony to others. And it is precisely because of this selflessness that they are truly called immortal gods, not God. Gods, every one of them, gods. The teachers of mankind use double-edged philosophy most of the time to give it to ignorant and mischievous men, the truths, because they want us to discover it. They don't present it on a platter because they want us to discover what it is. The mysteries are kept mysteries, not to withhold the truth, but to protect man from himself. In other words, the mischievous, what are they going to do with it? If they find out the truth and use it for selfish purposes, who are they benefiting? They won't benefit themselves because nature does not allow it. Eventually, it cuts it short, however that works. But great harm can be done to humanity in general. There is only one teacher to whom it is given to make final revelations with absolute surety against misuse. That teacher is the voice of the silence, all the work of all the teachers of history has been to awake in the human heart a listener to that voice. So we are all gods in the making, but we have a long way to go. This circle here, we talk about it. Now we're going towards our spirituality. This is coming into matter, and this is going towards the spirituality. So we're already moving in that direction. So everyone now has to make this effort for themselves. We have to verify, we have to make sure that we study the philosophy, we understand it, we assimilate it, we try to give it out. Only through this process can we come to understand the underlying significance of what is given in the philosophy. To teach the laws of the path is within the power of every adept, but every disclosure gives power. It is one thing to transmit doctrines orally to a disciple at low breath within the protecting walls of the sanctuary. While the burden of responsibility borne by the Hierophant is great, how much more hazardous an undertaking it is to place in writing within the reach of all secret doctrines lost to the world for many centuries. Who can measure the knowledge that must have belonged to H.P. Blavatsky and to her hidden colleagues under whose guidance she worked? So there it is. She was not whom she seemed to be. Even within her lifetime, the occult pretenders made capital of the most sacred of her teachings, and in the 7 times 7 years, and a lot more than that now, the movement changed. HPB herself has said that she did not take up her mission blindly. She knew what would happen. Evils would come, she said, but greater evils would be avoided. So that HPB was chosen to be the messenger hints of her greatness as a being who could serve at such a time, because she didn't come to a particular area of the world just like the previous one, because each prophet or giver of these truths had come to a particular people, particular place, but she came to the whole world. She started her work in United States of America, and she traveled everywhere, and then went to India, and from India came back to England, making these 3 centers established so that in the future ages to come, one would help the other. And the havoc wrought not by her coming, but by a world little able to bear her presence, suggests in some measure the sacrifice of one who would serve at such a cause as she did. Because they're all persecuted, we said, their life stories are same, but where she was concerned that persecution took to such limitless portions, yet she stood her ground, she never wavered. It just shows what kind of strength such a being has internally, because of that voice of the silence, because they are attuned to the core of their own heart, and it is a sacrificial effort they undertake for the benefit of humanity. They are selfless. So in order to understand these beings, we need to put ourselves in their own position. But anyone, she says, who comes into this field of operation definitely is going to suffer to some degree, because of the in her time it was of course worse, because now it is better known. Karma and reincarnation has kind of sank into our philosophical attitudes. People have some understanding of it. There's a lot of Westerners who believe in it and are moving in that direction, but at her time it was the Victorian age. She had to crush that mental attitude so that a new attitude could come in its place, and she obviously did a great job, because the new ideas that have come from her writings, even if the people who write about it do not acknowledge where it came, we know where it came. Those of us who know what the secret doctrine is and what ISIS is, we know when we read the stuff where they come from to some degree. But she never claimed any authority to herself. She always made the statement that this was the Master's Lodge that was giving the philosophy out to the world. She was just the agent, but in her role, she stood up to the whole world and defended Theosophy through her writings and helping people to assimilate. And her hope was that a few would be such beings in their turn to be able to disseminate this philosophy when she was not on the scene anymore. And we know how few they were at that time, of course.
We recognize the path here, and I think it says in the voice, the path is one, but the pilgrim has to choose their own way to get to the point where you're talking about, become an adept, or benefit humanity. So, and there are those charlatans out there claiming to be the one. How do we deal with that and stay on the path without diverging too much and being accused of being narrow-minded if we just try to stay with one source of information? We're advised to read the same passage over and over again. That's better than going out and reading everything in the world to try
So
to
your question
go
is,
there.
how do we differentiate between the real and the unreal,
Right.
and not be dubbed narrow-minded? Well, she was dubbed a lot of things too, and she didn't pay any attention to it. She had a task to perform, and she did it. And so Mr. Judge followed, R.C. followed, they stood their own ground. This is a growth process. There is a statement that those Theosophical students who are in the movement and giving it all they've got have been in it before, and that they have become sure to stand up to the pressures put on them by their families, their friends and associates, and they can stand it. So they have to progress from there. Those who are being introduced to it in this life have a different task to perform. The philosophy given, philosophy of Theosophy given in the 19th century and kept alive all through the 20th, and now we're in the 21st, is the original writings. As said, what they bring is given in symbological language. The symbology of the soul is not the same as the written languages of today. It belongs to the sacerdotal, and then came Sanskrit, Senzar and Sanskrit. So, it is stated that the wisdom of the ages, all the accumulated knowledge of the ages, is kept in symbological language, in other words, in symbols. And it is written on a few pages. The whole philosophy she gave out is written on a few pages. So, in order to understand the philosophy, we have to study it. There's just no two ways about it. And it would be like saying, let's go and get an idea of what Shakespeare did or what Plato wrote by reading a book that is about what Shakespeare wrote or what Plato wrote. Why would we do that? We want to read what Plato wrote. If you want to go and read somebody else's comments about it, how would you compare it to the original writings of that writer, of that philosopher? How would you know what Plato said if someone interprets his writings and tells you something that is not true? You have to study the primary, the original. It's the same with this philosophy. Until we understand that it is a complete system, it cannot be mixed with anything else. You can mix it, but what is it you're achieving? At the end of this life, if you haven't figured out what these symbols are, you're going to come back and start all over again. If you establish that continuity of consciousness in this life, when you come back in your next incarnation, then you will know where you left that work and you will continue on with it. A lot of us waver from the path because we are interested in all different things and we want to know what other people have said about it. But that's not the key to understanding it. The key is to study the originals, just like in the olden days. That wisdom is in these writings. It is not in other people's discussions about the originals. It is in the original itself. So that is why that emphasis was put to study the originals, to stay with it, so that the impress it makes in you grows as the time grows. What is the other thing masters say? If you're making an effort, then your inner light goes on. The inner light goes on and it shines. This obviously has a spiritual significance because it is stated they're like standing on top of the mountain, and when they look down, they see humanity as one family, not individuals, until this inner light goes on. And they're there to assist us. Because they're our friends. The elder brothers of humanity are friends to this humanity. They're there to provide us assistance at every turn. If our aim is noble, it is selfless, it is for the benefit of the all, they will assist us wherever and whenever they can under law. And knowing this, why would we doubt anything? They're there. We can only know them through our own inner light. No other can tell us that they are not there. So when you move in this direction, you get assistance because they're everywhere. And there are all different grades of them. They always have agents in different parts of the world, and they come to our assistance. And HPB and Mr. Judge, how did they write those books? Isn't there soul energy in those books? Is it the pencil that writes, or the pen, or is it the soul expression of the human being who's putting those things on that paper? So there are different ways of becoming one with that current, because nevertheless, people can believe it, not believe it, but once we find that current, it assists us. But it is internal to each human being. And the other thing is, the associates are everywhere too in the Theosophical circles. Yes, we have to walk this path on our own, but it doesn't mean others cannot help point the direction to us. They can help us with what readings we should pay attention to, and they can help us understand certain passages if we have questions about it. So it is a responsibility of all of the associates to help one another. We just read this 7 translucent mankind exist, and they all work as one. The brotherhood works as one. There's only one life, one oversoul, one substance, one law, karma and reincarnation. So once that becomes imprinted in us, this knowledge is already there. It's internal to each human soul. So what we are doing is bringing it out. And so that has tremendous hope for humanity when that soul assumes responsibility for its own development on this physical plane. Thank you. We hope to see you next week for our special commemoration of Mr. Judge's life and work.